This is Melissa. It is Real History on September 25, 2025. And it's 6:30 p.m. And I give you the time because I had already recorded something a little bit earlier this afternoon. And then I got a call from Joe. And Joe, I told you about in the spring that I had gone up to go to church with Joe and his wife, and I met their two little girls, and it was nice. And after church, we went to barbecue. so, so I was telling you the story of another barbecue outing that I had, and I'm going to get that one back in there too. But Joe called me and had something that he wanted to discuss, and I found it to be very interesting. And he and I did a little bit of sleuthing together, and we came up with some things that I found interesting, and maybe you will too. So I'm going to incorporate a little bit of what I was talking about earlier, and rather than cut and paste, it's a do-over. On Tuesday of this week, I drove down to a town just north of Austin. Austin is the capital of Texas. And I had gone down because someone named Jim, who is a longtime listener to Alan and is a member of the CTTM book club, invited me to come down and have barbecue. And he had kind of said it, I don't even know if he was serious, but he said, if you're ever down here or whatever, I'll have barbecue for you. But I took him up on it. And I have a cousin that lives in the same town, and I don't see her very much at all. In fact, I saw her at my Aunt Betty's big birthday party a couple of years ago, and that was the first time I'd seen her in many, many years, and now I haven't seen her for 2 years. Now, my cousin Sherry is Mary's daughter, and I did a real history with Mary. You might remember that Mary learned how to fly an airplane, and she's a sculptor and was a teacher, music teacher, and she's just lovely. And Mary is going to be 98 in 2 days on Saturday. So I thought, well, if I'm going to go down and have barbecue with Jim and his family, I'll definitely have to see Sherry. So it's about a 2-hour, 45-minute drive one way. That's what it said, but it took about 2.5 hours to get there. I made good time and got up first thing and headed down and had coffee and homemade scones at my cousin Sherry's house. And I got to briefly see her husband. He is a Episcopalians. I think they split with the Anglicans, so I think he stayed with the Episcopalians. But anyway, he's a priest, and he's been doing that for a long time. And Sherry told me such interesting stories in the brief little visit that we had that I'd never heard before. And I said, oh, you must do a real history with me too. So I will save some of that for hopefully we will do that sooner than later. And then I drove about 15 minutes over from one part of that town to another part, and I met Jim, and that was really nice. And I have to say, the whole outing, meeting him, spending time with his family, having the barbecue, it just put me in a different frame of mind, and I'll try to describe it. It really slowed me down. And I think I needed that. I needed to have a break. It just put me in the frame of mind of not just wanting the day off, but maybe 2 or 3. So it was nice. And one of the things that was so good about, well, besides the fact that the barbecue was delicious, was that it was an opportunity to actually be a part of his family, and that's how I felt for a few hours. I rode with him over to the nearby school to pick up his daughter and bring her back home. And then his wife came home, and she had the son who had been at the dentist, and I met the young son, and he was lovely. And so it was just, it really did feel like being part of a normal, happy, functioning family for a few hours. And my life is a lot of work, and the young children aren't a part of my everyday life, so that was nice. And I just felt really good. I thought it's a pity that I can't just go around and meet everybody who's in book club, but I know there are a few flung all over the U.S., but you're also in Germany and England and Ireland and Scotland and South Africa and Australia, and probably missing some places here, but you're all over the place, so I can't do that. But a day trip, 2.5 hours down and 2.5 hours back, that was great. And like I said, it did put me in a certain frame of mind. When I got back, I could see the darkening sky over my town. I got back just past sunset, and the cats were happy to see me back. But I could see driving into town, it looks like there might be a storm gathering. I hadn't checked the forecast, except the morning I left, I saw, okay, it's going to be one of the hottest days that we've had all year on the day that I'm driving. In Fahrenheit, the high in my town was to be 97, but where I was headed down to see Jim, 99. And it actually did get to be 100. It got to the triple digits, so it was hot. And then I saw the darkening clouds and way off in the distance, a little bit of lightning. And sure enough, when I woke up yesterday morning, it was a deluge of rain. And that lasted for hours, which was good because it was starting to get a little bit dry. But when I woke up yesterday morning, I didn't feel like doing anything. I just kind of, wanted to take it easy. So I started reading. Oh, I forgot to tell you that when I got home in the rain, I saw on the kitchen table that my brother had brought in a little package that was sent to me by a friend, and it contained 3 novels. And I knew that they were on the way, but I didn't know exactly what they were. And I opened it up and I saw, they're not. It's not the kind of thing that I would ordinarily read. But yesterday morning, I started reading one, and I got hooked into it. But then I had a little bit of work that I absolutely had to do, so I did that. And one of my brothers was coming down from Dallas, and he wanted to get the whole family together because that's like an hour away, and he's not here all the time. So we all went to lunch and took my Aunt Betty to lunch. And it was interesting to me because the topic of Charlie Kirk came up, and I actually didn't say anything. I just listened. But nobody ever asks me what I think anyway, or my opinion. And it was interesting to get kind of a finger on the pulse of what's out there. What are we supposed to be thinking about this, and how is it taking, and is there agreement amongst the brothers, and so that was interesting. And did a little bit more work, and then I was on that slowed down, I'm on vacation mode, and I decided to read more of the novel, and I got more than halfway through last night. And I slept in this morning, and I, once again, just didn't feel like getting into my, rhythm. And my rhythm is go, go, go. And that's just the way it is. Everything is on the clock. I'm up at such and such a time, and I'm going to get some exercise, and then I'm going to have some, and it's like that. So I finished the novel this morning. And I finally got the book club video up, and then I checked the email, and I hadn't checked email in a couple of days, so there was a lot to go through, and I'm just seeing what might be super important and what not. Now, I had gotten an email from Sigrita, and I put up the email talk last week where she told about her adventure in Gstaad in Switzerland. And I should say right now that I was scheduled to have, and you'll remember me saying last week that I was going to be on with Nick Hayes from Hayes Reviews Today, and we would talk about the second novel, Paralandra, in C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy. And Nick had a death in the family, and I will leave it to him if he wants to talk about this with us. But even back and forth with Nick about that had already set it up for me to be thinking about things, thinking about Alan and thinking about Hamish and thinking about just like a slower pace of what matters and why. So Nick and I do plan to record that next week. So Sigrita had sent me an email in which she was concerned because in the video I put up last week, she mentioned a man who was the head of service, and she didn't name him. And I went scrounging around just looking for different people, and I got the head of actually the spa part of the operation, and I just put his picture up, and she said, I don't know that man, and I didn't meet him, and I'm afraid we're casting a shadow on, some poor innocent man. And I said, well, I wrote back and I said, don't worry about it. I don't have that many listeners. So if you live in Switzerland and you're anywhere near the Hermitage Spa and Hotel, don't take your pitchfork and torch out and go after the man whose picture I put up, because it's not even the man she was talking about. So we only wish, we have no idea if the head of the spa was a Freemason or not, and we only wish him well. So I told Sigrita, I said, well, I might say something. So I did. What was interesting about that, the feedback on that, and also some of the research that I did when I was looking for illustrations. So I couldn't find the head of the service personnel that she was mentioning. But I realized that the Menuhin Music Festival, and she said was named for someone named Yehudi Menuhin, was very interesting in the things that I pulled up. And I also got some very interesting feedback from people about him and his son, someone named Gerard Menuhin, and, the whole lay of the land. And I'm just going to recap this really fast. I had mentioned in the real history that Yehudi Menuhin was not a Zionist. He was kind of anti-Zionist, anti-nationalism of any form, and was an internationalist and had promoted a lot of the ideas and values that the internationalists wanted promoted at that time. Peace, UNICEF, UN agenda, that kind of thing. Well, there was a comment on the video that said, did you know his son Gerard Menuhin wrote a book, he wrote an autobiography called Lived It Wrong. And he also wrote a book called Tell the Truth and Shame the Devil. And I looked into that, and this was really interesting. So I don't want to get too far afield here, but it brings in themes, once again, of nationalism versus internationalism, and what is sometimes characterized as the self-hating or the... So Gerard Menuhin, the son, ran the Menuhin Music Festival and Academy for a number of years until his views became more well known, and then he was fired. It is interesting because that seems to be what we're seeing across the world, which is the populist slash nationalist playing out against the internationalist. And we're told by big thinkers such as Alexander Dugin, I've mentioned him before, that it's not theater, that we're actually seeing something play out, and maybe at a lower level we are. So the reason I highlight Gerard Menuhin and Yehudi Menuhin today is because they came up last week, or at least the Yehudi Menuhin came up, and Gerard Menuhin has been called an activist. He's associated with the neo-Nazi movement in Germany. He's of English and Jewish descent, and it's useful to say English and American descent there because his Jewish father was American. His book, Tell the Truth and Shame the Devil, published in 2015, argues that the Holocaust is the biggest lie in history, that Jews are an alien demonic force which seeks to dominate the world, etc. He said that the world owes an apology. I find it interesting that these themes of nationalism, here is his father, who was an internationalist, who wanted a one world government, UN style, for peace. When I was looking up illustrations for that video, I found the story, I think it was on Wikipedia, of how Yehudi Menuhin got his name. He was born in the U.S., and his parents were looking for an apartment, and they went somewhere, and the landlady informed them right away that they should relax and not worry because she never rented to Jews. And I think at the time that the woman, Yehudi's mother, was pregnant with him, and they set that woman, the landlady, straight, informed her that they were Jews, and they went and found another apartment. And then she vowed, this could be an apocryphal story, or, the foundation myth kind of story, I guess you would say. But she said, and my son will be named Yehudi, which means Jew. So that is how he got his name. Then he becomes a renowned violinist, one of the best in the world, and has a music festival named after him that he started, and is championing the ideas of internationalism and more or less the UN agenda. Very much, like I said, against nationalism. And then there were some other comments, again, that were letting me know about everything that Yehudi Menuhin had promoted, and more about the whole family. So that was interesting. And I mentioned some of that to Sigrita, and she found it interesting, but she also thought it was good that we had both narrowed the scope, and I think so too. On the other hand, she was talking about an elite suprastructure that she had stumbled onto in the Gstaad region of Switzerland. So I thought it bared repeating and following up. But again, regarding that picture, if you watch the video, just don't go after that poor man whose picture I used, who had nothing whatsoever to do with the story. I then said that this was a do-over because I got a call from Joe this afternoon. I had just finished making the recording, and I had to troubleshoot something on my connection to the internet wasn't working. And I was checking a couple of possibilities, and I was actually on the phone with the internet provider, and I got a call from Joe. And Joe, I mentioned, I went to church with him and his wife in the spring and had barbecue with them after church. And I saw the call come in, and I couldn't take it because I was on the phone, but I could see there, then he left a message. So I went back later and listened to the message, and it had to do with and the Middle East and what we are supposed to think about the Charlie Kirk story. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. And I was just about to call him back, and Aunt Betty called, and she wanted to let me know that her phone was down in case I had been trying to reach her. And so I chatted with her, and I finally got on the phone with Joe. And Joe said, you mentioned, what are we supposed to think? What do they want us to think? Not who did it, or not, did this even happen, but what is it that they want us to think? And so he took me through a series of things that he had listened to or just picked up on. Again, he was being a fly in the wall of his own family, and they had the things that they liked to listen to, and they had their perspective and point of view. So he was listening and then reporting that back. And he said, I see that we are being told from official sources that we're not to be as supportive of the Jews as we were told that we were supposed to be. In other words, the jaywalkers, he said, and I probably should have said that too, but it's out, hey, cat's out the bag, that they were no longer to be the untouchable group. So while we were on the phone, he said that his wife had been listening to a podcast interview between somebody named Patrick Bet-David and Nick Fuentes. And Nick Fuentes, I mentioned him briefly on Sunday. This is far right. They call him white nationalist, even been called a neo. And his wife had picked up on something that she was kind of pleased with herself. And I will say, too, that Joe said, because of listening to Alan, and maybe he even said me, but because of listening to Alan, he is able to see things from a different perspective, and sometimes the things that he can see then appear to his wife as, wow, you really called that. And it's just him thinking it through, kind of asking the question, well, what are we supposed to think about this? And so she was pleased with herself for picking up on something. She wasn't sure who might have picked up on it. But the story with Patrick Bet-David, and he's a wealthy man who has a podcast, and you can look into him yourself. I'll put a link up there. And he claims that he's all about freedom of speech. So he'll talk to anybody. And he's talked to quite a few people over the years, including Nick Fuentes, Donald Trump, and I was telling Joe, as I'm looking him up, I said, oh, look, he did an interview with Benjamin Netanyahu last month. So that's Patrick Bet-David. But Joe's wife picks up that Nick Fuentes said that he had done something at Prager University, and so had Charlie Kirk. And Joe said, don't you think it's interesting that they've got this university connection? And we were, he hadn't listened to it and he hadn't looked it up yet. He had just called me and he had it in his head that it might be New York and he couldn't remember the name of it. But while we were talking, we pieced it together that Prager University is actually in Washington, D.C., and it is not a university. It's kind of a media training course, if you will, for conservative activists. And it was started by Dennis Prager. But that's Prager U or Prager Uni or Prager University. Not a university, but a training ground. And so Joe and I are talking and we're looking up the connections and see, yes, Charlie Kirk actually had a lot of interaction with Prager U and also with something called the Leadership Institute. And so I'm trying to see what was the connection there. I couldn't see that Nick Fuentes had been part of Prager University. In fact, he had been quite critical of the Prager U people for being pro-Israel and pro-Zionism and so forth. So I'm still digging around going, well, where is that connection? Because I knew that his wife just probably got it right. We just didn't know yet what we were looking at. So the connection that I found with Joe was something called the Leadership Institute. So yes, there was the connection that with the Prager U, but mostly by Nick Fuentes saying Prager U has this, we love all things Israel, that he doesn't approve of. So the Leadership Institute trains conservative people on how to be activists. And Charlie Kirk had lots and lots of interaction with Leadership Institute. And it is said that most of the people who worked for him at Turning Point USA had come through the Leadership Institute. Nick Fuentes said that he had attended an event when he was a young man, I think maybe 18 years old. And then he had a falling out because he had said something about how people shouldn't just be able to come into the country that weren't, it was the white, you got to be white and be part of this country. And evidently the trainer was a Lebanese American and took offense. And, so there was a whole story there that made Joe and I laugh because it seemed quite unlikely. You can look it up yourself, and if you see that same story, you can laugh too. But what we put together for our own satisfaction was because Nick Fuentes claimed that his being canceled by Leadership Institute propelled him. It caused him and his cause, his group, to quickly escalate. And just as an aside, I saw that also coming up through the Leadership Institute was James O'Keefe. And James O'Keefe was trained at the Leadership Institute, and I guess he worked for the Leadership Institute for about a year. And during that time, he produced his Planned Parenthood expose video where a young girl was encouraged to lie about her age to obtain an abortion. So what Joe and I were putting together for ourselves is your leaders are supplied for you. Remember how Alan Watt would always say that your leaders are supplied. And Joe made a really good comment there that you get a lot of fake cancellation. Someone in his family had heard that even though, Tucker Carlson was supposedly fired from Fox or let go from Fox, he was still really on the Fox payroll when you look at the severance package and so forth. Candace Owens was canceled. And some of you who follow all of this closely may remember that. So Joe's assessment is you've kind of got a fake cancellation. And Joe's wife had also heard some comments that Tucker Carlson made at the memorial for Charlie Kirk. He did not watch it, but she did. And there were some statements, the anti-Israel kind of statements that are now, like I said, okay for some to make. And so the bigger thing here, I said, what is it that they want us to think? One thing that has been pointed out to me in the last week and a half or so is the reminder that it is prophesied, right? It's prophecy. It is prophecy that the world will turn against. And there's a coalition from the north, and that includes Persia, which is now Iran, and that attacks the nation. This is interpreted as an event that has not yet occurred. So you have all of these turbulent things that have been prophesied to happen. And the question then is prophecy or long-term business plan. And I mentioned that Darren in South Africa had reminded me, he said, don't forget to look at the fact that, the Gulf States Union, their own kind of NATO for security, is being promoted right now. All of these things came into view. And the thing that I kept reminding people individually, if they call or email, is we're seeing what is put there for us to see. And it's good sometimes to remind ourselves that all of this, as much as we think we're sifting through the clues, like, murder, mystery, dinner, theater, or the game of Clue, and we're piecing it together for ourselves, we're only piecing it together from the elements that have been put out there. So it's any YouTube video or BitChute video or Rumble video or a tweet on X. I keep saying to people, you do understand that this could be generated, that video that you're looking at, that tweet that you're believing now tells you what happened. This whole narrative can be generated on a military base somewhere by people that have clearance to do it. This is information warfare. And so to keep looking and seeing what is it that's out there for us to look at. Joe was just laying this out quite neatly, that here we have something that happens, or we're told has happened, and it's an opportunity to bring a lot of characters like a Nick Fuentes to the surface, and to plant these ideas that you've got up to no good, just in case you didn't see that before. And you've got people that have been raised to positions by their cancellation, their so-called cancellation, like a Candace Owens or Tucker Carlson, that are an authorized voice that can kind of turn your head ever so slightly so that you can start to say, well, okay, it's not off limits to discuss this anymore. We can say some things that we had been noticing or we had been told to notice. And that was a key thing that I discussed with Joe. It's what we're told to notice. Because believe you me, if the story behind the assassination of Charlie Kirk was not one that they wanted out there, we wouldn't have seen it. We are under that much kind of careful control and curation of all of the information that we have. And Joe made the interesting and quite astute comment. He said, whatever you think of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and what he's going to do about making America healthy or bringing some certain things about to the spotlight, whatever you think about that, people were actually given a choice what they could watch. Were they going to watch the blow-by-blow coverage of Charlie Kirk, or were they going to watch these hearings? And he said people chose. They chose to follow this horror movie. And he said the thing that I had actually said this in the first run here that I had recorded. That is what it is. Alan was always saying, we pick a character in a horror movie, we identify with them. They're the hero or the, potential victim. And then we get behind them and it feels like it's happening to us. And so we can't turn it off. We can't leave because what happens next? And that's what all of these events are. It's, matrices, the matrix within the matrix. And so I am now going to share something completely different. Last week, I got a call from my Aunt Betty, and she asked me if I had transcribed the letter that she gave me. And I said I had started to, but it was tough going because it was very faded. It was torn in some places. And I had to, pick it up and look at it with a magnifying glass. It was on a wood. I'll share a picture of it. It was not easy to get to. But then after she said that, I had an idea. And I thought, why don't I pick up the whole letter, which is on a wooden stand. And it's been on there for so long, I can't take it off. And just read it onto a recorder and then transcribe my audio. And that actually went much, much faster. So I got that letter done, and I'm going to print it out on a nice piece of paper, some nice paper for my Aunt Betty. But I'll tell you what it is. This is a letter that my grandmother was given by someone in the family. And Aunt Betty says she doesn't remember who gave it now to my Meemaw. But, and she said, I'm not even sure Meemaw remembers, but she said she probably does, but I didn't know. So my grandmother valued the letter quite a bit. It was written in 1869. It was old, and she thought it was important. So she encased the letters in plastic sleeves, and I couldn't even figure out how to open it. And there's rings on the wooden stand that she had made, and I couldn't figure out how to open those either. At some point, the letter was photocopied, and that was placed over the original, and then there was paper clipped over on top of that, and the whole point being was to keep the letter from fading. And my Aunt Betty had stored it in a room in a closet, so it wasn't getting a lot of light, but still it was quite degraded. So the letter was written April 8, 1869. And I had a hard time when Betty told me who gave it to whom, as far as she could remember, piecing it all together. But here is a little bit of real history. This is a letter that my great-great-grandmother's brother's wife. Is that hard enough for you? My great-great-grandmother's brother's wife wrote to some people, and as Betty recalls, these people were living in Louisiana, where the wife's family was from. And the great-great-grandmother's brother's wife had moved from Louisiana with her husband, and they were living in Texas. I looked up the county, and I think it might be near Waco, which I actually passed through on my way down to see my cousin and Jim, the listener, in Falls County, Texas. There could have been another Falls County, but I doubt it very much, because I think that these county lines were drawn a long, long time ago and have stayed as they were. So here is that letter. And at the very top of the letter, she wrote, "There is a piece of Willie's breeches and Dora's Christmas dress. The checked," which would be checked or checkered, but the checked is Willie's pants, Willie's head is as red as ever. Falls County, April 8, 1869. And below the date and the location, there were some things that I would never be able to make out no matter how hard I tried. I just didn't understand it. There are a few missing words here, and there are some things that I can explain to you that I looked into myself. But here is the letter. Dearest brother and sister, I have been anxiously expecting a letter from you. I have concluded to quit writing. I want to know if you can't get paper or pens. I know I send a stamp in every letter I write, and that made me laugh. I want to know if you can't get paper or pens. I know I send a stamp in every letter I write. I wrote a letter for Charlotte last Sunday, and she says it will be the last until she gets one, and that would be back from you. She hasn't got a letter in 5 months from there. I got a letter from Frank not long ago, and he has got another boy and calls him Frank Seymour. That is only 6 children, as you know. I took a buggy ride Tuesday. I went 12 miles from home out on the prairie. Belle hitched George and John to it, and I tell you, it was pleasant riding. Dora and Willie and Belle and myself were all that went. I tried to get Charlotte to go, but Jim had penned a cow for her, and she stayed to tend to her. I went to a man's house by the name of Barnes, and they all know the Estes girls. I knew them when they lived in Limestone County. They saw Ed, and they know Ed too. Old Barnes has got a son named John, and he married a girl named Elizabeth Chisholm, and she was there, and she told me Ellen and Margaret went home with her from meeting. And I put in parentheses, is this church? ? And I'm pretty sure that it is. They would have called going to church, going to meeting. So she was there. She told me that Ellen and Margaret went home with her from meeting and took dinner. Levia, you can let the girls see this letter. I expect they all remember them. Charlotte knows them. Tell them that they have got good homes out here and plenty of everything around them. Old man Barnes, well, if I was fixed like him, I would be satisfied for lifetime. Levia, if you and Valeris were out here, I would be happy, for I am always wishing you was here so I could divide with you. But Charlotte shared your part. Now, see, I don't know what that means, but there's something that she could divide with her brother and her sister. But Charlotte shared your part. Levia, when we got here to this place, the whole crowd could not raise but 25 cents, and we bought a broom with that to sweep the house. Bill mortgaged his wagon and 5 mules for corn and meat to do us until crops were made, and we 3 families had plenty all the year. You know we did when it amounts, we did, okay. So they had plenty all year. We did when it amounts to $510. There she put it in, wrote it numerically, and then wrote out $510. She did that a couple of times in this letter, and I was appreciative of it because her numerals I could not make out. So they had plenty all year for 3 families because it was $510. Well, it is all paid, and Bill has got the mortgage, so he now owns his wagon free and clear again. He traded Monty, that little mule, for a splendid pony and another little mule besides, and they were stolen this spring 1 year ago, and we never heard from them. He then bought that big horse I told you about, and $75 for him, and he took the bots and died. So I didn't know what bots were. I had to look this up. What would bots kill a horse? It said that bots is botfly larva, which can infest the intestines and cause irritation and damage and even death. Now he has bought 2 more mules, and give $120 for the pair of them. And he gave 100, and wrote that out again, 100 bushels of corn for a 3-year-old mare mule, and we call her Jenny. She belongs to Willie, the only one he will claim. Bill traded his wagon off and gave $20 to boot. And he has now got a splendid wagon and 7 good mules. Bill has got old George, John, Patsy, and Beck yet, and 3 young mules he bought. He says he intends to start 2 teams on the road. Levia, he went off and was gone only 13 days and had to lay up 4 on account of rain and made $110. Bill drinks his whiskey whenever he wants it. He has bought 2 barrels since we've been out here. Now, I don't know how long they were out there. And this is one man who's he's bought 2 barrels. So I had to look up to see what was in a barrel, and that came back with different measurements depending on the year, but I isolated it down into the 1860s. So I made a note here for my Aunt Betty. Because of the year the letter was written, then a barrel was likely 36 gallons, or just under 164 liters. So he would have had, some 72 gallons of whiskey there that he was working on. So that was her husband. Then she went on to write, "But I nor my 2 children don't want for anything. I don't know when the house has been clear of flour, coffee, and molasses. We have that very near all the time since last fall." So those she considers her staples: flour, coffee, and molasses. Bill has bought 9 barrels, and I made a note here that a barrel of flour, because it's 9 barrels of flour, so a barrel would be 196 pounds or 89 kilograms of flour, wheat or rye. So he bought 9 of those, so that's a lot of flour. Since last fall, to trade on and to eat, and I have money to spend all the time. He was talking about leaving here, but not while I can help it. I am afraid to leave here. I don't believe I can find as good a country as this. I am perfectly satisfied to stay here. I know everybody thought that old Bill Nairn was a lion when he told you what a country this was. But it is better than he told it to you. I know it to be so. I love the people out here, and if I feel bad and I don't want to wash, I can hire a Negro anytime, give them flour, or I can sew for them. So this is interesting because remember, this is at the end of the Civil War, and they've moved from Louisiana to Texas. And when she says, "I don't want to wash," the washing of laundry, that would have been a big job. You've got to build a fire, and you have barrels for, like a whiting barrel, and then you've got your other wash barrel and your rinse barrel. You have at least 3 tubs. I'm calling them barrels, but there are at least 3 tubs that are over burning wood. And so she will trade the Negroes, because that's what she called them after the Civil War, and they were called that African American or black people. I'm not sure, but deep into the 20th century. So she would trade flour or do sewing for them if they would come and do the wash for her. I have entirely talked Bill out of, and there's a word missing here. The paper is torn. I can't see it, but I'm guessing that it might have said leaving. So I've entirely talked Bill out of for a while. He has got to hunt a house to live in, or because we've got to give this one up, for he ain't going to make any crops. I expect we will move about 2 miles from here, and he's going tomorrow and buy me 2 good, gentle milk cows. Levia, my dear sister, I don't want you and Valeris to think that I am bragging. God in heaven knows I am not. I am telling you the simple truth about this country, and if you doubt my word and don't got money to bear your expenses to come and see, just send old Bill Narron word. That is all you'll have to do. He will come after you or send money to you. So she's talking about her husband that likes to drink and has the wagons, and just ask and he'll come and get you. This is Thursday and a beautiful day. Oh, how I wish I could see you. Now I must tell you something about Dora and Willie. Dora is a child that is loved by everybody. Now, there's a missing word here, but there's something. Something given to her for a Christmas present. And I could not make that out if it was, but it's an article of clothing. So this was given to her for a Christmas present by a young man. And I bought her a pair of whoops, is what it looks like. Whoos, because remember the S, even at that time, sometimes looked like an F, especially when there were two used together. One might look like an S and the other an F. And then I was thinking, well, they still wore hoops under their skirts and their undergarments to give that full skirt look. That could have been what it was, but I don't know. But she has got plenty of clothes, and she goes to meeting and everywhere else she wants to go to. She has no idea but what she's 16 now. Bill is just as good to her as ever. As for Willie, a sack of salt about save him. And that we just don't know what that, a sack of salt about save him. Whatever that means. Levia, he wears breeches now, and so I made a note here that he's now old enough for long pants. So what would that make him, 8 or 10 years old? But he's wearing long pants now. And she writes, he's got a hat, and the next trip his pa makes, he will get a pair of boots. And just as soon as I can have it taken, you shall have his likeness. And that's a photograph. He can ride a mule by himself, and he ain't much bigger than when you saw him. Jim and Charlotte are both as big of fools about him as you was. Charlotte made him call Bill, and I can't make out what she's saying there. Charlotte and Dora and Willie all send their love to you both, and Dora says to tell you that she's got another pet hen. Willie says, here's a kiss. Give my love to Pris and all the family, and I quit by wishing you was here and to write soon. Now on the letter, right when she says, I quit by wishing you was here and to write soon, jammed right up to that is this next story. And there's a bit about Will and Bill and Willie. And we know, okay, so is Willie sometimes called Bill after his father, Bill Narron? I don't know. But here's the odd story that she writes next. A boy passing on the road, a damn rascal, and the little rat saw the boy pass back in an hour and says, oh boy, you are a damn rascal. Charlotte will say, Bill, if you will talk for me, I will show you the calves, and anything and everything she will tell him. She will say anything. I tell you, he is the worst child in the world. The next part is torn and faded. There was a lot of mystery for me in that story because I couldn't tell. I read it over and over again. I had the magnifying glass. Was it the little rat, her son Willie, who saw the rascal, the damn rascal, called out, oh boy, you are a damn rascal. And you got the idea, at least I did, that Willie doesn't talk to anyone yet. He's a young boy and he's not really vocal. And Charlotte is saying, if you will talk for me, I will show you the calves, and anything, everything she'll tell him. Anything you want if you'll just talk. So then she says, I'll tell you he's the worst child in the world, but he's obviously beloved, so there's a mystery. Tell Aunt Lily I want to see her. There's another tear on the paper. There's some people, it's a name of people we rented land from, but that's torn. we rented land from, and his wife have no children of their own, and they love Willie and Dora both. And when they go there, if she don't have some candy and cake, she'll make some and hire Bill to talk for her. So again, she's given him candy and cakes to make him talk. Jim and Charlotte are well and doing well, but no increase in their family yet. Levia, tell all my friends and acquaintances that I like the Western country and give them my love. Tell Uncle Jack and all of his family, Elizabeth in particular, if she is living, that I am well and satisfied that this country is as far ahead of that as day is of night. Bill says tell Uncle Jack that he is drunk as usual, and he says to tell you that Willie can ride a mule and go to the mill and drink whiskey like his daddy, and you can get plenty to drink. Tell Uncle Jack that he'd not have lost any money by listening to Bill. Bill Narron has made some very good friends. Bill is now fixing to load his wagon with cotton to go again. Levia, I forgot to tell you, Eli Brown and Lottie moved out here, but they are gone back now. They haven't got anything. Eli has gambled it all off. Well, you must excuse this short letter. This leaves us all well, and I trust it may find you the same. And if God will prosper us and be on our side, Bill is going to buy a hack. And that's a hackney or a covered cab or carriage. And then I am going to come and see you. Charlotte says tell all of the girls to listen if they hear a cart coming, to look out for it, and I will be there. The cart will be like a loud noise. Goodbye. Take care of yourselves. Love, Sister. And I could not make her name out, and my Aunt Betty couldn't remember either, but it looks like Chrissy. Love, Sister, Chrissy Narron. Now, my father was the keeper of the family records, and if he were still here, he'd be able to say, oh, yes, that was so-and-so, and so-and-so, and so-and-so, because he had pieced this all together. He even wrote some books about the family, but I didn't take the time to go and dig those up and dig into the Narrons. I wasn't sure that even this bit of it would be interesting to you, let alone to correct all of the misnamed people. But it did strike me. I think the timing was good for me to work on it. On the way down on my little day trip on Tuesday, I had listened to a talk from Alan Watt, and I think I'll share the particulars of that later in terms of the date and all of that. But it was kind of a hard one for me to listen to. It reminded me a lot of loss, but also of just the importance of the time that we have with people that we love. And Alan said something there. You know, he was distinguishing between two kinds of chatting. Chatting that's just kind of useless, and then the chatting that matters. And it's interesting, this is just something to think about, but the kind of chatting that he thought was useless was the political, the what are they doing to us now, the who's, because none of that is really about your life, is it? But the kind of chatting that he thought was useful was when you could sit, and he said, hopefully face to face with someone, and just talk about things that may not be that deep, but it's helping you put things together. And I imagine that, who knows when, but probably soon, maybe tonight, could be tomorrow, that steam will build back up in me, and I'll be just as cranking it out as always, and looking at this story and comparing it to that story and diving down a rabbit hole, which at the end of the day is probably meaningless, but that's what I do. But I felt refreshed from doing that thing that Alan said was important, connecting with people one-on-one, and then just taking a little time and checking out altogether. And so from my slowed down part of the world to yours, I wish you a good week, and I will be back next week with Nick. We'll be talking about that second novel. And the week following, I'll be talking to Neil Foster again, and hopefully I will have gotten somebody from this city to call me back. But you never can tell. Just one last thing, though, that I wanted to say about the letter that I transcribed for my Aunt Betty. The life, can you imagine the slower pace? Everything goes by really horse and buggy or maybe train. And it takes a long time to go back. And if you're not happy with your family because they're not writing you back, well, goodness knows what you'll have to do. I guess you do have to get a carriage, a hack, and drive the next state over. And I don't know where they lived in Louisiana, but I'm imagining that that trip would have been, 2 or 3 or 4 days one way, maybe longer. I don't know. I didn't do the math on a hack trip to find out. But just the different pace. And here's a woman, she's happy. Her husband's happy as long as they have food on the table and he makes a deal and he can get his money back. And if they lose an animal, they can replace the animal. And he's got his whiskey and she can dress her daughter up in pretty clothes. And they can all go to meeting and have a little bit of local gossip with old man Barnes, who knew the Estes girls. It's just such a different pace of life. And I don't know about you, but sometimes for me, this pace where we somehow feel, like Alan would say, it's a horror movie, and you've got to keep watching because it might affect you. And I'm just reminding myself that what's going on, whether it's Charlie Kirk or the Middle East or Russia and Ukraine, does some of this affect me? Yeah, when it comes right down to things like inflation and taxes and those kinds of things, which are, starting at the top and working their way down to the bottom, and it can get worse and worse. But I don't need to know the fictional horror story that's put out for me. I don't have to follow that. And if I want some kind of distraction, then it's probably to be found in my own neck of the woods. So thanks for listening and take care.
I've got something